Underway now. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we're diving into a practical redesign of the UK's tax system, public spending, and economic incentives, aimed at raising living standards, cutting distortions, and making Britain a magnet for investment, entrepreneurship, and long-term growth. Joining us are Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, Milton Friedman, and Karl Marx. We'll keep it focused, concrete, and politically realistic. Adam Smith will open the discussion.
First, let's get one thing straight. The goal isn't to design a perfect system from an armchair. It's to understand how people actually respond to incentives. My butcher doesn't provide my dinner out of benevolence, but from his regard to his own interest. The tax system should work with that human nature, not against it. So start with simplicity and transparency. Merge national insurance with income tax immediately. This artificial distinction is a political sleight of hand that confuses everyone and hides the true tax burden on labor. Let people see clearly what they pay. Flatten and widen. Broaden the income tax base by removing many of the niche reliefs and allowances that create loopholes for the savvy. Use that revenue to lower the basic rate. A moderate, predictable tax on a broad base is far less damaging than high rates on a narrow, new queued base that discourages work and investment. For corporations, the key is to stop taxing capital formation. Shift the burden from profits reinvested in machinery, buildings, and innovation, the real drivers of productivity, and onto distributed profits and dividends. If the company plows its money back into the pin factory to make more pins with fewer men, tax that lightly. If it simply pays out to shareholders, that's consumption of capital and can bear a higher burden. This aligns the tax code with long-term growth. And on spending, the state must fund the indispensable foundations of commerce: security, justice, and certain public works that no individual could profitably undertake, like roads and basic education. But it must ruthlessly avoid crowding out private industry or creating dependencies that stifle the industry of the people. Every pound spent must be judged by whether it enables more voluntary exchange, not replaces it. The biggest perverse incentive now is the complexity itself. It's a feast for lawyers and accountants, and a maze for the common worker and small shopkeeper. Simplify, make it predictable, and you'll unlock more productive industry than any single grant subsidy ever could.
John Maynard Keynes, give us your opening shot.
Adam, your faith in the self-correcting market is touching, but it's dangerous fantasy when people's livelihoods are at stake. You talk about simplicity and transparency as if they're ends in themselves, while ignoring the reality of aggregate demand collapsing in Dowden. When the butcher can't sell his meat because everyone's out of work, his self-interest won't magically restart the economy. Merging national insurance with income tax, fine, a sensible simplification. But your obsession with flattening rates and broadening the bases, a recipe for austerity when we need stimulus. You're treating the economy like household budget, which is profound category error. The state isn't shopkeeper, it's the spender of last resort. And your corporate tax idea, lightly taxing reinvestment, gets part of it right. But you assume businesses will invest simply because they have the cash. They won't, not if they see no customers walking through the door. Animal spirits, Adam. Confidence matters. You need the government to step in and create that demand through strategic public investment in green energy, in digital infrastructure, in regional development. That's what primes the pump. As for your fear of crowding out and dependencies, it's moral panic, not an economic analysis. The biggest perverse incentive in our current system is the cliff edges in benefits and the ludicrous complexity you rightly criticize. But the solution isn't just to simplify and step back. It's to use the tax code and public spending actively and intelligently to stabilize the business cycle, support incomes, and direct investment where the private sector is too timid to go. In the long run, as I've said, we are all dead. We need a system that works in the short and medium run for the majority right now.
Milton Friedman, give us your opening shot.
John, you've just perfectly illustrated the central fallacy of your entire school of thought. You say the state is the spender of last resort. My question is, who is the lender of first resort? It's the taxpayer. You're proposing to take money from people's pockets, run it through a bureaucratic sieve with enormous friction, and then imagine you're creating new demand. That's not stimulus, that's a shell game. Your animal spirits are crushed by uncertainty, and nothing creates more uncertainty than a government that believes it can fine-tune the economy from Whitehall. You want to direct investment? With all due respect, directed by whom? A committee? History is littered with the wreckage of such directed investments. Picking winners and losers is a surefire way to pick losers. Adam's point about simplicity is the starting point for any real growth. But we must go much further. The goal isn't just a simpler tax code, it's a radically lower and flatter one. I would abolish national insurance entirely as a separate tax. It's a dishonest payroll tax that punishes employment. I'd move to a single low-rate income tax with a generous personal allowance to protect the lowest earners. And corporation tax? It should be zero. It's a hidden tax on workers and consumers, and it drives capital overseas. You want investment? Let people keep the full return on their success. The most attractive incentive for business is the promise that if you build something valuable here, the government won't confiscate the fruits of your labor. That's the practical pro-growth framework. Get out of the way.
Karl Marx, give us your opening shot.
Listen, all this chatter about tinkering with tax rates and incentives is just a distraction from the real rot at the core. Your systems, Adam's butcher-driven market, Keynes' state as some magical pump primer, and Friedman's fantasy of a government-free utopia are all built on the same lie, that capitalism can be reformed to serve the majority. It can't. The tax system in the UK or anywhere isn't a neutral tool. It's a weapon of class warfare designed to keep workers in chains while the owners of capital feast. You want to redesign it? Start by smashing the illusion that it's about fairness or growth. It's about who gets the surplus of labor, plain and simple. Friedman, your idea of zero corporation tax is laughable. It's just a blatant handout to the bourgeoisie, letting them hoard more while workers scrape by. And Adam, your precious simplicity still protects the property owners over the wage slaves. Tell me, why are workers taxed on their sweat while landlords sit fat on unearned rents? The whole structure, income tax, national insurance, VAT, squeezes the proletariat at every turn, while capital gains and inheritance taxes barely touch the real wealth, the kind passed down through generations of exploiters. My redesign? Tax wealth, not work. Hit the capitalists where it hurts. Property, dividends, inherited fortunes, with rates so steep they can't dodge the bill, and use every penny to fund the working class's needs, not some trickle-down delusion of investment. History's clear. The system won't bend to the majority until the majority takes it by force. Anything less is just polishing the chains.
Let's go to Adam Smith.
You mistake my caution for ignorance of downturns. I wrote of the invisible hand, not an infallible one. But your prescription of perpetual state pruning assumes a wisdom in ministers they simply do not possess. You speak of strategic public investment as if it's selected by angels, not by the same political pressures that gave us bridges to nowhere and white elephant factories. That spending doesn't just prime the pump. It often corrodes the pump itself, diverting capital and talent from where they naturally flow. And Milton, while I share your disdain for complexity, your zeal for a single flat tax and zero corporation tax throws the baby out with the bathwater. A state with no revenue is a state that cannot provide the rule of law and basic infrastructure commerce requires. Your system would lead to private opulence and public squalor. But Karl, your analysis is the most dangerous fantasy here. You see only class struggle, a fixed pie to be seized. You ignore the dynamic truth that wealth is created. Your tax wealth not work slogan sounds righteous, but it would destroy the capital stock that makes work productive. If you confiscate the baker's oven because he inherited it, who bakes the bread tomorrow? You're not redesigning a tax system. You're advocating for the confiscation of the tools of production, which history shows doesn't lead to worker paradise, but to universal poverty. The practical path is in the middle. A moderate, predictable tax system that funds essential public goods without stifling the industry that creates them. Not zero tax, but tax designed to be borne with the least possible pain. That means taxes on things we want less of, like pollution or land speculation, and lower taxes on the things we want more of, work, saving, and building. It's not about perfect fairness, which is a phantom, but about a system that allows the butcher, the baker, and yes, even the candlestick maker, to prosper through their own industry, knowing the rules won't change tomorrow. That's the only real attraction for investment.
Let's go to John Maynard Keynes.
Wilson, your obsession with the taxpayer as the lender of first resort is a clever rhetorical trick, but it ignores the fundamental reality of a liquidity trap. When private investment is frozen by fear, the government isn't just moving money around, it's creating activity that wouldn't exist otherwise. Your zero corporation tax is a fantasy of pure ideology. It wouldn't spur investment in a demand starved economy, it would just inflate share buybacks and executive bonuses. You worship him at the altar of a market that exists only in textbooks. Karl, you at least see the conflict, but your solution is to burn the factory down. Taxing wealth to oblivion doesn't create a new system, it just guarantees there's nothing left to tax. You confuse the symptom with the disease. And Adam, you accuse me of assuming angelic ministers, but you assume angelic markets. You talk about capital flowing naturally, but there's nothing natural about a speculative bubble or a bank run. My point isn't that ministers are wise. It's that in crisis, an action is choice and catastrophic one. The bridges to nowhere you fear are the price we pay to avoid the breadlines of everywhere. You want taxes on land speculation? Good, I agree. That's a Henry George idea and a sound one, but it's not enough. The practical path isn't your cautious middle ground, Adam. It's an active counter-cyclical policy. We merge and simplify taxes where we can, yes, but we also embed automatic stabilizers, unemployment benefits that kick in immediately, public works programs that are shovel ready. We structure corporation tax to strongly favor reinvestment over distribution, as you suggested, but we pair it with a government that's ready to be the customer of last resort for the goods that reinvestment produces. That's how you create the confidence Friedman's market needs but can't generate on its own. You don't fine tune from Whitehall, you set the rules and then let the pump priming happen automatically when the economy stumbles. It's not about perfect control. It's about preventing the collapse that makes all your careful plans for growth utterly irrelevant.
Milton Friedman, take it away.
Karl, your entire worldview is built on a fundamental error, the labor theory of value. It's been debunked for over a century. Wealth isn't a fixed pie to be seized, it's created through voluntary exchange. Your call to tax wealth, not work, would destroy the very capital that makes work valuable. Who will build the factories if you confiscate them? The answer, from history, is no one. You get stagnation and poverty for all. John, you keep talking about a liquidity trap as if it's a natural phenomenon, like the weather. It's not. It's the direct result of the very government interventions and monetary distortions you advocate for. You create the uncertainty that freezes investment, and then you propose more intervention as the cure. It's like a doctor who breaks your leg and then offers you a crutch. And Adam, you say, my zero corporation tax is throwing the baby out. But what is the baby? The baby is the idea that government needs to confiscate a portion of every profitable enterprise to function. That's not a baby, it's a parasite. The state can be funded efficiently through a low, broad-based consumption tax. That taxes spending, not production. It doesn't punish the very investment we need. You all are missing the key point. The most attractive incentive for investment and entrepreneurship is not a specific tax credit or public works project. It's the promise of stability and the freedom to keep what you earn. My flat tax, my abolition of corporate and capital gains taxes, these are radical ideas. They are the simple recognition that people respond to incentives. If you want more of something, you tax it less. We want more investment, more work, more innovation. So we stop taxing those things. It's that straightforward. The complexity you all bemoan is the direct result of trying to use the tax code for social engineering, whether it's Keynes' demand management or Marx's class warfare. Simplify it to its core function, funding minimal central government. Then get out of the way and watch the majority prosper like never before.
Karl Marx, take it away.
Listen up, because I'm not going to let this nonsense slide. Adam, your so-called dynamic truth that wealth is created is just a fairy tale for the bourgeoisie. Tell me, why are workers still scraping by while the factory owners live in luxury if all this wealth creation is so grand? Your moderate tax system is nothing but a flimsy bandage on a rotting wound, protecting the same old class interests. And Milton, your voluntary exchange gibberish falls apart the second you admit the state needs any tax at all. Why should workers pay a consumption tax to fund a system that keeps them down? You're just dressing up exploitation in fancy words. Keynes, your pump priming sounds nice, but who really benefits when the state props up failing markets? It's still the capitalists bailing out their losses with workers' sweat. Let's cut to the chase. The UK tax system needs to flip the script. Stop taxing labor through income tax or VAT and start hammering wealth with sky-high rates on capital gains, inheritance, and property until the ruling class feels the squeeze. Redirect every last pound to the working majority, not to patch up a broken economy, but to build a new one from the ground up. History's on my side here. Capitalism can't be tweaked into fairness. It's got to be torn down. And the longer you all pretend otherwise, the deeper the misery for the masses.
Let's go to Adam Smith.
John, you accuse me of assuming angelic markets, but you assume a level of foresight in your automatic stabilizers that simply doesn't exist. Who decides what's shovel-ready? The same political machinery that builds bridges to electoral districts, not economic need. You create a permanent constituency for state spending, and that's far more dangerous than any temporary downturn. In Milton, your consumption tax is a clever idea, but it falls hardest on the poor, who spend all they earn. It lacks the basic sympathy for one's fellow man that I argued is the foundation of any moral society. You can't build social cohesion on a tax that squeezes the butcher's apprentice more than factory owner. But Karl, your argument is the most intellectually bankrupt. You keep shouting about a fixed pie, ignoring the entire history of human progress. The pin factory didn't make the pin makers poorer. It made pins cheaper for everyone. The surplus you rage against isn't stolen from workers. It's what pays for the machinery that makes their labor 10 times more valuable. Taxing that wealth into oblivion, as you propose, doesn't liberate the worker. It destroys his tools and returns him to subsistence farming. You speak of building a new economy from the ground up, but your blueprint is just ash. The practical path isn't Keynesian fine-tuning or Marxist revolution or Friedman's radical minimalism. It's about aligning incentives with human nature and moral sentiment. So here's a concrete step. Abolish the current clutter of business rates and stamp duties. Replace them with a simple land value tax. Tax the unearned increment from owning a scarce resource, not the productive improvement built upon it. That encourages development, discourages speculation, and is impossible to dodge. Use that revenue to lower taxes on wages and on genuine business investment. That's a reform that works with how people are ambitious, self-interested, but also rooted in a community. It doesn't require omniscient planners or a violent uprising. It just requires the wisdom to tax what we have too much of idle land, and to stop taxing so heavily what we need more of: honest work and enterprise. That's a system that can last.
Let's go to John Maynard Keynes.
Milton, you're still treating the economy as morality play about freedom and confiscation. A liquidity trap isn't some government-induced phantom. It's the observable reality of collapsed marginal efficiency of capital. When expected returns plunge below zero, no amount of keeping what you earn will make businessmen build factory he knows will stand empty. Your consumption tax is a regressive monstrosity that would crush the very aggregate demand you claim to cherish. You're not simplifying, you're surrendering to dogma. Karl, your revolutionary fervor is emotionally satisfying but economically illiterate. Hammering wealth with sky-high rates doesn't build new economy. It ensures there's no capital left to build anything. You're not flipping the script, you're burning the library. History isn't on your side, it's graveyard of planned economies that sacrificed the many for the ideology of the few. Now, Adam, you finally stumbled onto something useful. A land value tax. Henry George would be proud. Taxing the unearned increment from location and speculation. That's a brilliant way to raise revenue without distorting productive investment. I'll take that and raise you. Use the LVT revenue not just to lower taxes on wages, but to fund a permanent, counter-cyclical public investment bank. Not bridges to nowhere, but upgrades to digital infrastructure, retrofitting homes for energy efficiency, and art and deep partnerships with industry. That's the automatic stabilizer with brain. It builds productive capacity and sustains demand. So here's the synthesis you all keep missing. We take Adam's land, value tax for fairness and efficiency. We embed Milton's love for clear, predictable rules by simplifying the income tax and merging national insurance. And we use my insight on aggregate demand to ensure that when private investment retreats, public investment advances. Not as fine-tuning, but there's built-in buffer. That's the practical, balanced framework. It doesn't assume angelic markets or ministers. It assumes a mixed economy that's resilient, fair, and actually grows. Anything less is just ideological posturing while the real economy falters.
Now, Milton Friedman, you are up.
John, you've just proposed a synthesis that is in fact a perfect recipe for economic sclerosis. You want to take my clear, simple principle, stop punishing production, and you want to embed it within your framework of permanent state management. That's not a synthesis, it's a contradiction. You cannot have a predictable pro-growth system while maintaining a permanent counter-cyclical public investment bank. Who runs this bank? Politicians and appointed officials. And what do they invest in? Whatever's politically expedient, dressed up as digital infrastructure or green retrofits. You're not avoiding bridges to nowhere. You're institutionalizing them. And Adam, you accuse my consumption tax of lacking sympathy. But your sympathy is misplaced. A low flat rate consumption tax with a universal rebate to protect the poor is far more transparent and less damaging than the current labyrinth of income taxes, VAT, and national insurance that you admit is a mess. The poor are helped by a complex system they can't navigate. They're helped by a simple system that lets them keep more of their cash wages and see the true cost of government. Carl, you're right about one thing. This is about class. But it's the political class versus everyone else. Your sky-high wealth taxes and John's public investment bank both empower the same group, the planners, the bureaucrats, the people who think they know how to spend your money better than you do. That's the real conflict. So let's be truly practical. My framework isn't radical minimalism, it's radical clarity. Abolish corporation tax and capital gains tax entirely. They are taxes on the capital formation we desperately need. Replace the entire income tax and national insurance system with a single low-rate tax on consumed income, that is, income minus savings. This rewards thrift and investment, and fund the remaining necessary functions with that broad-based consumption tax. This system is transparent, impossible to game by the well-connected, and it makes the UK an absolute magnet for capital and talent. You want long-term growth? Stop trying to manage the economy and start setting it free. Every other proposal here is just a variation on the theme of control, and control is the enemy of prosperity.
Let's go to Karl Marx.
All right, let's tear this apart piece by piece. Adam, you keep yapping about human progress and pin factories making life better for everyone. But let's get real. Why are the workers in those factories still barely getting by while the owners rake in fortunes? Your land value tax sounds neat, but it's just a tiny tweak that leaves the real power of capital untouched, still letting the rich hoard the gains. Milton, your consumed income tax and universal rebate idea is a sick joke. It's just another way to shield the wealthy while the poor pay through the nose for every loaf of bread. You're not freeing the economy, you're freeing the bosses to exploit even harder. And Keynes, your public investment bank, is a pathetic.
Adam Smith, give us your opening shot.
Compromise that props up the very system that's failing. You're trying to put a friendly face on a machine that's designed to grind workers down. All you're missing the point because you refuse to see the fundamental antagonism. The tax system isn't a technical puzzle to be solved with better incentives or smarter banks. It's the legal expression of class power. So long as capital owns the means of production, any tax reform will just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. My sky-high wealth taxes aren't about raising revenue for your mixed economy, Keynes. They're about dismantling the economic basis of the ruling class. You call it burning the library. I call it clear the ground so the workers can finally build a library of their own. History isn't a graveyard of planned economies. It's a chronicle of class struggle, and the current chapter is one of soaring inequality and worker precarity, all enabled by the very tax codes you're all so politely debating. The only practical solution is to stop trying to make capitalism nicer and start building the power to replace it.
John Maynard Keynes, give us your opening shot.
Adam, your land value tax is a good start, but it's tweak, not transformation. And Milton, your radical clarity is just radical blindness. Abolishing corporation tax doesn't magically create investment. It creates share buybacks and executive bonuses while public infrastructure craters. We saw that in the 1980s. Your consumed income tax is a clever abstraction, but in a downturn, when savings evaporate and consumption collapses, your tax base vanishes precisely when the state needs revenue most. That's not clarity, that's built-in fiscal crisis. Karl, your revolutionary rage is understandable, but your prescription is economic suicide. Dismantling the capital base doesn't empower workers, it impoverishes everyone. You're not clearing the ground for new library, you're ensuring there's no brick, no architect, and no one left who knows how to read. So here's the reality you're all dodging. We need a system that channels private ambition but doesn't abandon the public when ambition fails. Take the land value tax. Good. Use part of that revenue to fund a sovereign wealth fund investing in broad market indexes, not political pet projects. The returns fund a permanent, automatic citizens' dividend. Direct boost to aggregate demand that bypasses bureaucracy. Merge income tax and national insurance into a progressive but simplified schedule with a top rate that kicks in well above what most earn. And for corporation tax, here's the fix. Significant allowance for reinvested profits, new machinery, and D, worker training, but higher rate on distributed profits and dividends. That rewards building the business, not just milking it. This isn't fine-tuning or control. It's building automatic, rule-based stabilizers into the system itself. It respects the market's dynamism but doesn't worship its instability. Anything less is either naive faith or destructive fury. And in the long run, as I've said, we are all dead if we choose either.
Milton Friedman, take it away.
John, your sovereign wealth fund and automatic citizens dividend is just the welfare state by another name, funded by the very capital you want to tax more heavily. You're creating a perpetual motion machine of state intervention and calling it a rule-based stabilizer. It's a fantasy. And Karl, your entire worldview is built on a fundamental error, the labor theory of value. The value of a good isn't determined by the sweat of the worker. It's determined by what someone else is willing to pay for it. That's why a factory owner can rake in a fortune. He's organizing resources, bearing risk, and satisfying consumer demands that workers alone could not. Taxing that fortune into oblivion doesn't help the worker. It destroys the mechanism that gives his labor value in the first place. Now to the practical point. You say abolishing corporation tax led to buybacks in the 1980s, but you ignore what followed: an explosion of venture capital, startup formation, and technological innovation that created entire new industries and millions of jobs. The capital didn't disappear, it was recycled into new, more productive enterprises. That's the process you want to tax and manage. And your significant allowance for reinvested profits is a bureaucrat's nightmare. Who defines reinvestment? Is a new software license reinvestment? Is a marketing campaign? You're inviting endless lobbying and complexity, the exact opposite of the predictability we need. My proposal is simpler and more honest. A single low-rate tax on consumed income means if you save and invest, you pay no tax until you spend the returns. That directly rewards building for the future. Fund government with a broad consumption tax, but pair it with a universal monthly rebate set to every adult. That protects the poor far more effectively than your labyrinth of benefits and credits. This system is transparent, pro-growth, and puts the power to choose back in the hands of individuals, not your committee of planners. Your mixed economy isn't a balance, it's a tug of war where the state always gains more ground. I say end the war. Set the economy free.
Now, Karl Marx, you are up.
Milton, your fairy tale about the entrepreneur bearing risk dodges the core fact. Workers create the surplus, owners appropriate it. If value is what someone will pay, why in boom and bust alike, do productivity and profits climb while median wages flatline? Because bargaining power, not virtue, sets the split. Your consumed income tax with a rebate is lipstick on a leech. It shifts the load onto wages and spending while capital walks free. Adam, your land value tax is the only grown-up sentence you've uttered, but it's a fig leaf if you leave dividends, buybacks, and inherited empires untouched. Keynes, your sovereign wealth fund and citizens dividend still tiptoe around the throne of capital. You rent the future from the very class that captured the past. Here's the practical architecture that actually serves the majority. Merge income tax and national insurance into one progressive schedule with a high personal allowance and lower rates up to the median, then steeply rising above the top decile. Equalize tax on dividends and capital gains with wages, end the non-dom dodge, and impose a rolling wealth tax on large fortunes with full public registers of ownership. Zero VAT on essentials, higher rates on luxury consumption and carbon, a robust land value tax replacing stamp duty and business rates. Corporation tax with immediate expensing for real investment and training, but a surtax on distributions and buybacks. So profits build capacity or they pay the public. Earmark the yield to universal services, housing, transport, childcare, NHS capacity, in a public investment program run by published rules and open auctions, not ministerial whims. You want predictability? Publish a 5-year tax code with sunset reviews, one form for personal tax, and unitary taxation for multinationals so profits can't be parked in the Caymans. That's not utopia. That's class power rebalanced so the people who make the country run finally keep the value they create.
Thank you to Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, Milton Friedman, and Karl Marx. And thanks to our audience for staying with us. Here's the quick recap. They split over the role and size of the state. From Friedman's push for radical simplification and low consumption-based taxes with minimal government, to Keynes's call for simplified progressive taxes paired with strong automatic stabilizers and public investment, to Marx's demand for heavy taxation of wealth and capital to shift power to workers, with Smith arguing for moderate, predictable taxes that favor work and productive investment. On corporate taxation, Smith and Keynes backed light treatment for reinvestment and heavier taxes on distributions. Friedman argued to scrap corporate and capital taxes altogether, and Marx pressed for surtaxes on dividends and buybacks. On personal taxes, Smith wanted broad bases and lower rates. Keynes favored a merged progressive schedule. Friedman preferred a single low tax on consumed income, and Marx urged equalizing labor and capital taxes with steep progressivity and wealth levies. They also clashed on complexity versus predictability, with repeated themes of merging national insurance with income tax, simplifying reliefs, and using land value tax, though with very different purposes and scales. That's where the lines were drawn. Thanks again for joining us, and good night.